Why is the hull of every ship in the world painted red? Why don't we see a ship with a blue or green bottom, for instance? Why red specifically? It is neither a coincidence nor a mere aesthetic choice. This color carries a strange history that stretches from the invention of ships to the present day. Without it, the shipping costs of everything you buy today would double. However, everything comes at a price. Today, we will reveal the dark side of this red paint, how it began as a life-saving idea and ended as a catastrophe destroying thousands of marine organisms in the ocean. But before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Imagine placing a clean piece of metal in warm seawater. What would happen? After only a few hours, the first microscopic bacteria appear, creatures the size of a dust mote that cover the metal in a thin film called a biofilm. This film is not just a layer, it is the welcome mat for the invaders to come. Within days, algae join the bacteria to reinforce this coating, and after a week, the larvae of barnacles and mussels appear. These organisms secrete a magical glue, stronger than the ocean waves, fixing them in place forever. After a month, the metal surface transforms into a full-fledged living colony. And after 6 months, disaster strikes. A solid layer several centimeters thick forms, making a single square meter weigh dozens of kilograms due to the accumulated organisms. This is not merely a distortion of the ship's appearance. It is a physical catastrophe by every measure. Imagine that the ship's hull, once as smooth as silk, has suddenly turned into a rough, protruding wall. Water no longer flows around the ship, but instead crashes against it with force. This roughness increases water resistance dramatically, forcing the engines to work at maximum capacity and consume massive amounts of fuel just to maintain speed. Did you know that a large ship without protection could carry up to 100 tons of marine life beneath its hull in just 6 months? This weight is equivalent to placing several fully loaded train cars at the bottom of the ship. Yet, despite all this weight and destruction, another monster lurks in the depths, a small creature that makes the danger of barnacles seem simple by comparison. And it is the real reason behind the invention of red paint. You might think a ship is at risk while sailing, but the truth is that the harbor is the real danger zone. There are more than 1,700 species of marine organisms waiting for nothing more than a ship to dock for a few seconds. While the ship is sailing at high speeds, it is difficult for these creatures to attach themselves. However, the moment it stops in port, water currents wash thousands of larvae toward it to begin their invasion immediately. In regions like Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, the catastrophe intensifies as warm tropical waters provide the perfect environment for these colonies to grow at a frantic pace. This silent invasion is not just a matter of parasites. It is a terrifying financial drain. A ship whose hull is inhabited by marine fouling consumes at least 10% more fuel. On a global scale, approximately $30 billion is wasted annually on extra fuel. Can you imagine that staggering figure? All because of living organisms that decided to make the bottom of a ship their home. Now it is time to reveal the #1 enemy of sailors throughout history. A small creature that has destroyed entire fleets. They call it the shipworm, but it is actually a type of mollusk with the scientific name Teredo. At the front of its body, this creature possesses a small shell that acts like a power drill. It begins slowly boring into the wood, tunnel after tunnel, inhabiting these passages for the rest of its life. Here lies the terrifying deception. If you look at a ship from the outside, the wood appears sound and sturdy, but inside, it is like Swiss cheese, riddled with holes and tunnels that have completely consumed the ship's structural integrity. A single worm can excavate a tunnel 60 centimeters long. Now imagine thousands of worms working together in a single square meter. Even hard Baltic pine cannot withstand them for more than 16 weeks before it becomes like a sieve. This creature was the nightmare that haunted every captain and the reason ships would suddenly sink while appearing perfectly intact. This little monster was no secret. It was a nightmare documented in the annals of history through the suffering of ancient Greek sailors. Though their ingenuity in engineering, they wrote about the shipworm with a sense of helplessness. It was a threat against which they possessed no weapon. Even Christopher Columbus did not escape it during his fourth voyage. He lost 2 ships entirely and described a surreal scene in his journals. The sails were fluttering in perfect health, yet the ship was slowly sinking because its hull had turned into a sieve that could no longer keep it afloat. The Great Spanish Armada was collapsing in tropical regions, and it wasn't cannons or storms that were the cause, but rather armies of shipworms silently devouring the ship's timber beneath the water's surface. It was a one-sided war, humans possessing gold and cannons against a microscopic creature possessing only time and the ability to drill. However, the danger was not limited to ships alone. It reached land and threatened entire nations with extinction. In 1731, armies of shipworms attacked the coasts of the Netherlands. The Dutch were protecting their land from flooding with massive wooden dikes. But these worms ate the pilings from the inside out. Suddenly, the populace found themselves facing a catastrophe where entire provinces nearly drowned. Not because of an earthquake, but because of a tiny mollusk. The Netherlands was forced to replace wood with stone in a process that took years and cost a staggering fortune. Even in the modern era, these worms destroyed entire piers in San Francisco. And here comes the surprise. Even to this day, scientists do not know how this worm digests wood. Its intestines are completely clean and do not contain the bacteria that help other creatures, like termites, with digestion. It remains a baffling scientific mystery for which no one has found an answer. Ancient sailors did not care about how it digested wood. Their sole concern was, how do we stop this monster? This panic and the constant search for a means of defense eventually led humanity to invent the most important naval weapon: red paint. For thousands of years, humans have tried to devise a shield to protect their ships, but the path was filled with failed experiments. The Phoenicians and Greeks used resin and tar, which protected the wood from water slightly, but did not prevent armies of barnacles and worms from attacking. The Romans decided to use brute force, sheathing their ships in lead sheets. The lead was highly toxic and strong, so the worms stayed away. But a major problem emerged. It was extremely heavy, expensive, and made the ship sluggish. Then, inventors began mixing terrifying substances, such as arsenic, sulfur, and even gunpowder, to coat the timber. They were trying to poison any creature that approached the ship. In England alone, 300 patents for ship coatings were registered within just 240 years. Imagine the extent of the struggle. Every inventor claimed to have found the magic solution, but in the end, ships continued to erode and sink. The world was waiting for a true revolution, a substance that combined lightness, strength, and defensive toxicity. This finally happened in the 18th century, the breakthrough that changed the balance of naval power. Britain was the pioneer of this transformation, as England began sheathing the hulls of its warships with copper sheets. They discovered that copper was not just a metal, but a chemical weapon. It dissolves very slowly in water, creating a cloak of toxic ions around the vessel. This shroud made British ships faster and stronger, and more importantly, they no longer needed to be taken out of service for cleaning for many years. This was one of the secrets behind the global dominance of the British fleet. But there was one problem. Copper was extremely expensive. While sheathing a warship might be feasible, sheathing thousands of merchant ships was an impossible and prohibitively costly dream. This led to the question that changed the rules of the game. Why sheath the ship in metal when we can paint it with materials that serve the same purpose? The plan was to transform copper and its toxic substances into a liquid that could be easily applied to any ship regardless of its size, at a minimal cost. Thus, the idea of bottom painting was born. Here we arrive at the secret of the color we see today in every port across the world. Red lead. Chemists formulated a paint based on lead oxide, which was a highly toxic substance, and that was exactly the goal. No barnacles, no algae, and not even shipworms dared to approach it. The shocking truth is that engineers did not choose the color red for its beauty. Rather, the color was a natural byproduct of mixing lead oxide with copper oxide. This effective chemical mixture is reddish-brown or blood red in hue, and thus, ship hulls were painted red simply because the active ingredient was that color. Over time, sailors discovered an incredible advantage to this color. The striking red stands out clearly against the dark surface of the water, making the load line, the level to which the ship sinks, visible from a distance. Inspectors could determine if a ship was overloaded just by looking at how much of the red paint remained above the waterline. Thus, a color born from toxins transformed into a safety marker and a global tradition that has endured for hundreds of years. To this day, ships continue to wear this red armor before venturing into the deep. Ships transitioned from wood to iron and then to steel. But did the problem disappear? While it is true that shipworms cannot eat steel, barnacles and algae continue to attack ships with the same ferocity. Surprisingly, these organisms secrete acidic substances that cause the metal to rust and corrode. Therefore, red paint has remained an absolute necessity for protecting modern vessels. The paint is designed to dissolve very slowly, layer by layer, day after day. As the ship sails, the coating releases microscopic amounts of toxic substances into the water immediately surrounding the hull. This chemical shroud creates an invisible protective zone around the vessel. Any barnacle larvae or algae attempting to approach or attach face instant death before they even touch the metal. In this way, modern ships have transformed into fortified fortresses, protected not only by the thickness of their steel, but also by a smart chemical envelope that prevents marine life from colonizing their hulls. Initially, humans mixed any poison they could find, arsenic, mercury, and copper, to paint ships. The rule was simple: the more toxic the paint, the longer the ship survived. In the 1970s, a compound called tributyl (TBT) emerged, and it was incredibly effective. Ships remained clean for 3 full years, fuel consumption dropped, and maintenance costs vanished. The world believed the dilemma had been solved forever. However, terrifying mutations began to appear in marine life. Oddly shaped oysters, snails suffering from hormonal disruptions, and species facing extinction. Scientists discovered that even a microscopic amount of this substance was enough to destroy the nervous and hormonal systems of every living thing in the sea. They had created a shield to protect ships, but in return, they began poisoning the entire ocean. Once the world realized the scale of the catastrophe, the correction phase began. In 2008, the use of TBT was permanently banned on all ships worldwide, marking the largest environmental cleanup in maritime history. It was replaced by tin-free copper paints. As one layer dissolves, a fresh new layer appears to protect the vessel. Although this alternative is economically superior and saves fuel, it still leaches metals like copper and zinc into the ocean. Every second that ships sail or dock, thousands of tons of heavy metals leak into our waters annually. In harbors, copper concentrations reach terrifying levels that kill oyster larvae and prevent algae from reproducing. This copper does not disappear. It sinks to the bottom, turning ports into chemically dead zones for many years. The paint specifically engineered to kill organisms and prevent them from attaching has itself become a means of transportation for them. Microscopic creatures hide in the cracks of peeling paint and travel thousands of kilometers across oceans. When the ship reaches a new port, these invasive species emerge and multiply rapidly, destroying local species and disrupting the region's ecosystem. Today, we stand between two fires, protecting ships to save money and fuel, and safeguarding ocean waters from gradual metal poisoning. In the end, we must realize that the red color residing beneath ships is not just a fashion choice or a fleeting maritime tradition. It is the result of a grueling war of attrition spanning thousands of years between human intelligence and the stubbornness of ocean life. Did it ever cross your mind that a color we perceive as simple plays such a critical role in the global economy and the destruction of the oceans simultaneously? What part of this story made you rethink what we see on the hulls of ships? Share your thoughts in the comments. We have now reached the end of the video. Thank you for watching.